Good morning, and welcome to White Bear Unitarian Universalist Church. We're delighted to have you here, whether you're in person or attending virtually. It's good to be together, a community of youth, adults, and children, sharing the values of courage, reverence, and compassion. I'm Jim Van Ostrand. I serve on your board of directors, and I use pronouns he, him. If you're accompanied by children today, we warmly welcome your whole family. We invite you to explore our Soulwork Center over by the windows. where you can explore different activities designed to help all ages actively engage with today's worship service. If you have a joy or sorrow you would like shared in the meditation, please add it to our meditation bowl, which is also in our Soulwork Center, over there again, or in the chat box before the opening hymn. Please make sure to gain consent before you put someone's name in the bowl. After the service, if you're in the building, we invite you to enjoy some special treats and activities in our social hall to celebrate Reverend Sarah as she prepares for her last week with us. We hope that you'll check it out. For those online, our cyber social hour starts 5 minutes after the postlude and is a short time of connection and community. Look for the link in the chat box at the end of the service. Welcome to our church. Together we grow our souls and serve the world.
Come into this place which we make holy by our presence here. Come in with all your vulnerabilities and strengths, fears and anxieties, loves and hopes. For here you need not hide, nor pretend, nor be anybody other than who you are and who you are called to be. Come into this place where we can touch and be touched, heal and be healed, forgive and be forgiven. Come into this place where the ordinary is sanctified, the human is celebrated, the compassionate is expected. Come into this place. Together, we make it a holy place. I'm Reverend Roger, and my pronouns are he, him.
Lisa Sem is doing our chalice lighting this morning. You might notice that I am not Lisa Sem. I am in fact Sarah Goodman. My pronouns are she, her. I am sharing Lisa's words because she is not feeling well today. So I'm here with you. And these are her words. Our theme for February is vulnerability, the practice of being alive. It always seems appropriate to start with the definition. So Wikipedia defines emotional vulnerability in the words of Brené Brown. She's a social worker, a researcher, a professor at the University of Houston. She says, vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. Earlier this week, I had an email exchange with Roger that started with me reaching out to share, with a healthy dose of shame, that I didn't have a draft of my chalice lighting ready to turn over to him yet. I explained that while it was true that I'd been taken by surprise by how quickly February came, I'd been more honestly just been paralyzed by the task of confronting the new theme, vulnerability. I told Roger that it had been relatively easy for me to come up with examples where I'd chosen self-preservation over vulnerability. such as when I feigned indifference with family, friends, or coworkers to avoid difficult conversations, or the countless times I ran circles around myself trying to make things perfect, just to hide some deep insecurity. But then I admitted, when I looked for examples of times when I duly embraced vulnerability, I couldn't come up with a single situation. I sat with my lined paper and my sharpened pencil ready to make a list of life-changing risks that I'd taken along my journey, and I just continued to find nothing. So I posed the nausea-inducing question: is it possible that I've lived my entire life inside a steely facade to protect myself? Is choosing to be vulnerable really that hard, or am I just that unwilling to allow others in? I found myself in every rabbit hole imagining, trying to avoid the possibility of that being true. So with the uncomfortable realization that with no stories of my own to share, I could hardly be the right person to introduce the topic of vulnerability. I admitted to Roger that all I had to offer were some unfinished thoughts and a lot of Brene Brown in my head. Roger, with his usual thoughtfulness and infinite generosity, responded by suggesting that this moment of sharing about not feeling prepared might just be the moment of vulnerability that I was looking for. Could I have demonstrated a bit of courage in recounting my failing? Yes, indeed. And I have some more work to do. Today, we light our chalice for the courage to choose vulnerability. Now I invite you to join me in our opening words. May love be the spirit of this church and service be its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit to sing our opening hymn, number 318, We Would Be One. It's in the gray hardback hymnal.
Good morning. My name is Amy and my pronouns are she, her. And this morning I'm going to share a story that we share here often. It's a story based on a story written by Lynn Unger about a gathering at a UU congregation not like our own, where everyone, children and adults, were asked to create a paper heart. In this gathering, one child worked really, really hard to create the most perfect, the most beautiful heart he possibly could. It even had glitter in the shape of diamonds all around the outside. But as he was helping to clean up, he noticed the heart of one woman who was sitting nearby at his table. The heart she made was a mish-mash mess of all kinds of different colors. It had pieces that were ripped and torn, glued all over it. Parts of it were wrinkled and crinkled, and there was even a hole right in the center. Now, the child saw this heart and he thought, well, maybe she just needs a little bit of help. Maybe arts and crafts are not her strong suit. But when he offered assistance, he was surprised that the woman merely smiled and explained that there was, in fact, nothing wrong with her heart. It just showed all of the things that happened to her in her life. Right there, she said, pointing to a shiny green gem, showed when her heart was super happy, like when she made a new friend, or when her children were born, or all of the times that she was proud of the things that she had done, or proud of the people she loved. And right there, she said, pointing at a rip, showed the times in her life when her heart didn't feel so happy at all, when her heart maybe even felt a little bit broken. The woman told the child about the times in her life when she felt so sad. The time when her best friend got really sick, the times when somebody hurt her feelings, and when somebody she loved died. In fact, she said, every time a person comes into my life that I care about, they take a piece of my heart with them. Well, this worried the child a little bit, thinking of somebody having to give away all the parts of their heart. But what happens if you give it all away? He asked. You would be left with nothing. No, I won't, the woman responded with a smile, because you see, they give me a piece of theirs as well. The child looked down at his beautiful, perfect heart with the glitter and the designs he worked so hard to make. Then he looked again at the woman's mishmashed heart with the jagged colors and the rips and the wrinkles and the little hole in the center. And without hesitation, the child ripped off a piece of his perfect heart and he handed it to the woman. I share this story with you all this morning and many times every year because this story reminds me that sharing pieces of ourselves with one another is a big part of what we do together in this community. When we show up with our full and open hearts, ready to receive one another in all of our complexities, in all of our joys and our sorrows, it's a blessing. And as we get ready to say goodbye to Reverend Sarah, I'm reminded of how much we are all changed by one another and how much we have all been changed by you. We share pieces of ourselves and we leave little pieces of our hearts with one another. And so this morning, after the service, we're inviting those of you who are in person here to create your very own mishmash hearts. And as a blessing for Reverend Sarah as she prepares to leave us, we have hearts where you can add little pieces of your hearts to take with her on her journey. Our children and youth will also join in this project, so families will be able to meet up with their kids in the social hall following the service as we create our mishmash hearts.
I'm Kathleen Keating. I use she, her pronouns. And it's really a privilege, dear Reverend Sarah, to be able to share some thoughts of gratitude for the many ways you have served us here at WBUUC. Some of the people who thank you are those to whom you have provided pastoral care. Some are from the Third Thursday Conversations at the Heart of It group that you lead. Others are Wellspring participants. Some are youth in the coming of age class that you serve with Amy Peterson and others. Many, many others are the people you have touched and inspired with your sermons, where you share deep thoughts and observations, and sometimes vulnerability, and often humor. We also know that you are part of the reason this church thrived during the pandemic. Many of us had never heard of Zoom, and look at us now. We thank you, Sarah, for your leadership, your many technical skills, your generous sharing of your resources. You find words for us for every occasion. Most of all, thank you for your loving attention to all of us. We are being brave, trying to follow the model of grace and dignity you've demonstrated at this very challenging time. But we are deeply sorry that you are leaving WBUUC. And we wish you every blessing for your next step. These words from singer-songwriter Ann Reid's song, Every Long Journey, they just seem apt for today. We cannot know what you go through or see through your eyes, but we will surround you, the pride undisguised. In any direction, whatever you view, you're taking our love there with you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. So Sarah's ministry here has been such a gift to this congregation in a tumultuous time. So 5 years marked by pandemic and the departure of the longtime beloved Victoria, and the music staff, and just on and on and on. Sarah had no idea, like any of us, when she signed on, what all would unfold. And Sarah has been such a key to keeping things moving forward. So the work of an assistant minister, other than the times they're up front, often very much behind the scenes. Certainly during the onset of the pandemic, when everything had to be reinvented in a very short period of time, like a week in some ways, Sarah was really, really super helpful because of her knowledge of technology and worship and programming, helped all that happen in a way that was really remarkable. In pastoral care, that's not a public thing. You know, there's one or two other people in the space, and Sarah's touched a lot of you through that. Small groups, again, just a handful of people. Sarah has cultivated a wonderful culture around small groups here and been part of many. So I give just thanks for that everything you've done with compassion and dedication. Sarah's a wonderful colleague. I know Jack will say some words next week. I've so valued your collegiality here. It's been a joy to work with you. I know our whole staff feels that way too. And this is an amazing staff here. I've said that before. It's an amazing staff. The cohesiveness is incredible. Sarah's a big part of that. A charge from Sarah to all of us unspoken is we got to keep that going. and we will, but because partly of your gifts that linger. My gratitude to Sarah is immense, and I want to lift up a little bit about these last months that have been really hard, especially for Sarah, who's been so impacted by this staffing reduction. Sarah has navigated this really hard way with an incredible amount of integrity, compassion, honesty, professionalism, everything that I think if I was in her shoes I wouldn't be able to do, and without resentment. just amazing to me how you've navigated this difficult path. I've learned a lot from that. Not many of us would be able to do that. And then when I think about it, I think, but of course Sarah was, because that's what has marked her ministry here: integrity, compassion, commitment, professionalism, honesty, all those features. So how a minister ends a ministry is much like everything they did in ministry. And so your work here is a gift, including this last hard chapter. I am not going to be here next week, so I'm glad to be able to say today in front of all of you that I'm going to miss Sarah terribly, and I know the staff will and the whole congregation will, and wish you, as Kathleen said, blessing, blessing, blessing on the journey ahead. So, reception after, come on in. And we have several gifts to share with Sarah. One of them will be next week. The book of tributes that a lot of you have contributed to will be completed and given to Sarah next week. Another one is going to happen sometime when it's a good time to plant a tree, because it's going to be a tree not just in honor of Sarah, but also Sarah's family. So Sean, Jamie, Emily, extended family. Who a minister is and how a minister is able to do a ministry rests in so many ways on the family and the love and support that you all offer. So this tree will be planted. We'll let you know when and where, sometime when it's the right time in the spring, summer, or fall. Not today. And then finally, we have a tangible gift to share that Jody has created. So Jody, I'm going to invite you up here. So Jody McCormick is going to say a few words about it. I'll model it, and then we'll call Sarah up for the ceremonial putting it on her.
Well, you modeling it is worth the price of admission right there, Roger. I was honored when asked to make a special keepsake to represent all of us in saying farewell to Sarah. It meant a lot to me to be asked to do that, knowing that this is going to go with you, much like paper hearts, love from all of us, and many memories, Sarah. And as I was making it, as always, when I'm making something for someone, if you're any kind of a person that does any of that, you know that you hold that person in your mind the whole time. So as I'm sewing, I'm thinking about Sarah, and it's interesting what Kathleen said, and probably many of us have said, because my sentiments during that time centered around a lot of the same things: your sense of humor, the growth you gave us, all of us, together through the pandemic, your selflessness. And I thought, you're probably doing the same thing when you're creating your messages for the congregation. You're probably thinking of all of us, just like I was thinking about you when I made this. So specifically, this stole was made with Sarah in mind. It's simple in style, but complex in depth. The energy goes from one side to the other with the continuation of the tree. The palette is warm yet vibrant, and the angles are unpredictable. The message on the back needs no explanation. And if you can't read it, it says, "For Sarah, with gratitude, your WBUUC family." Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, I'm invited to say something. And I think the only thing I can think of to say is thank you. Thank you for being who you all are, for allowing me to be who I am and grow and just love you. So thank you for letting me love you. That's all.
So, our hearts go with Sarah. Her heart is with all of us, and that will always be true. At this point, I would like to invite children to go to who are registered, right? Go to the circles, which will be in the social hall. Yep. And we'll sing on their way out. Go lift it up, and that's number 1057 in the teal hymnal.
I invite you to join me in the spirit of meditation and prayer. Take a moment to find a comfortable place for your body, doing what you need to feel centered. It's vulnerable to be part of a congregation, to be still and centered with 100 people in the room and 30 households online. Let's take a time of silence and a moment to honor the vulnerability and strength that are mixed within us. The steel that brought you through this door and the wholeness that calls you to share your time with these people, some who are complete strangers to you, and the gift of being together this morning. I invite you into silence now. As we do every week, we hold the members and friends of this congregation who are struggling. We're struggling with finances, mental health, physical health, with addiction, with all kinds of struggles. We hold also the members and friends of the congregation who are joyful, exploring new possibilities and celebrating achievements. And today in particular, we hold some members and friends in love. We hold Steve Harmon and his family as they grieve the death of Steve's cousin, Bill Harmon. Bill lived a good, long life. He spent summers here in Mahtomedi, and for 15 summers, Bill and Steve went to church together at WBUUC and then at St. Jude's. We also hold Peter, who had to go into the hospital for a concussion yesterday. He's healing well at home. We're also sending healing prayers for coping for Uncle Phil and family. Phil fell and broke his hip in Mexico and was transported to Phoenix for hip surgery yesterday. He's doing well and inspires us. My tablet is very confused. I'm sorry, y'all. We hold all of those people, and we hold the tech that confuses and strangles us sometimes. We take a deep breath, and into this room, I invite you to share the names of those on your hearts. Is it a joy? Is it a sorrow? But bring their name into this room so we can hold them all together. Amen. Amen.
This community is sustained by the generosity of the people who call this place home. By giving to this morning's offering, you are giving life to the programs and services that make this place special. We will pass the donation plates now. You can also donate in 3 other ways: on the WBUUC page, or send a check or leave a check in the lockbox outside the front office, or use the text to give option found in your order of service or in the chat box. However you give, thank you for your generosity and your faith in this life we live together.
Our reading this morning is from Diana Gamblin. Babies are soft. Anyone looking at them can see the tender, fragile skin and know it for the rose leaf softness that invites a finger's touch. But when you live with them and love them, you feel the softness going inward. The round cheeked flesh, wobbly as custard, the boneless splay of hands, their joints are melted rubber, and even when you kiss them hard in the passion of loving their existence, your lips sink down and seem never to find bone. Holding them against you, they melt and mold as though they might at any moment flow back into your body. From the very start, there is that small streak of steel, though, within each child, that thing that says, I am, and forms the core of personality. In the second year, the bone hardens and the child stands upright, skull wide and solid, a helmet protecting the softness within. And I am grows too. Looking at them, you can almost see it, sturdy as heartwood, glowing through the translucent flesh. The bones of the face emerge at 6, and the soul within is fixed at 7. The process of encapsulation goes on to reach its peak in the glossy shell of adolescence, when all softness then is hidden under the nacreous layers of the multiple new personalities that teenagers try on to guard themselves. In the next years, the hardening spreads from the center as one finds and fixes the facets of the soul until I am is set and delicate and detailed as an insect in amber.
I want to, before I start, express my gratitude to Dick and Karen and Prill and Michelle for putting on the celebration today and over this next week. Thank you, all of you, for that. And definitely go into the reception. It's really, really going to be great in there. Also, Jody, thank you so much for creating that beautiful gift. It is just so embodies Sarah in this place. Thank you. So Brene Brown says that vulnerability is the birthplace of authenticity, accountability, joy, creativity, belonging, love, innovation, inspiration, spirituality, and adaptability. Wow, that's a lot, right? And I think it's true. Vulnerability is such an important skill to develop. But what might even be more amazing about vulnerability is, in spite of all of that it opens up possibilities for, many of us, including me, over and over again, choose not to be vulnerable. There's so much in our culture and in this business of being human that gets in the way. I'm so grateful to Lisa for sharing so openly and vulnerably her own experience with trying to write about this. I think it's an invitation to many of us just to own how hard it is. Brene Brown also says that the biggest impediment to being vulnerable is shame. I won't ask you to raise your hands unless maybe you're at home alone and you feel like you might want to. I wonder if there's anyone in this room, virtually in person, who ever has felt like they weren't good enough, or smart enough, or attractive enough, or nice enough, or tough enough, or emotionally intelligent enough, or athletic enough, or calm enough, or spiritual enough, or forgiving enough. Okay, yeah, I will raise my hand, all of the above. Yep, absolutely. And how many in this room, again, you don't need to raise your hand, but how many have ever done anything you're ashamed of? I can imagine some of you sitting out there and saying, like, today? Maybe. This week? Yeah, probably. This month? Yeah. This lifetime? Oh, yeah, for sure. Shame is universal, I think. One of the things I love about the Adam and Eve story is that it talks about a poetic truth about shame, that here we are, each one of us created whole and beautiful, and then, bam, right out of the gate, shame comes in. And it's not a good thing. Brene Brown calls shame the swampland of the soul, which is beautiful imagery. And here's what she says. She says, yeah, it's a swampland. Put on your galoshes and wade into it. Because the only way you're going to deal with shame is to own it, to study it, to learn whatever lessons it has, to wade through it, and then to let it go. It's of no further use at that point. Of course, most of us would rather have a root canal or maybe even die than wade into that swampland of shame. The ignored but nevertheless omnipresent shame that keeps us from being vulnerable. That's at the heart of this. You cannot deny or ignore the shame within and simultaneously find ways to be vulnerable. Self-deception, deception of others are also really handy tools to avoid going into that swampland. So for many of us is numbing ourselves with alcohol, drugs, gambling, the other things that we can be addictive about that help us avoid walking into that swampland of shame. And of course, addiction doesn't selectively just wall off shame. What it does is walls off a whole bunch of other stuff, potentially love, family, meaning, joy, beauty, which is why addiction is so hard and why it can, when unaddressed, exact such a cost. And it's not just shame that gets in the way of vulnerability. Our inherent fragility as human beings is another thing. We're not just babies are fragile, we all are. Starting with the fact that any of us can die at any moment, an accident, an aneurysm, a heart attack, anything, boom, we're gone. As the Mishmash heart story illustrates, we all have wounds in our heart. We lose loved ones. We make mistakes. We experience the death of so much in life, not just people, but other beloveds and other types of loss that we experience. For some of us, oppression, whatever guise the oppression comes in, multiplies these wounds as we experience microaggressions or macroaggressions. It leaves scars. So being vulnerable is hard, and sometimes actually it's dangerous. So here's another truth lifted up from the reading that Shara shared today, which is that we are fragile, and at the same time, we all have streaks of steel within us. We all need streaks of steel within us. Those who are buffeted by oppression often need streaks of steel even more than people like me who live lives of privilege in so many ways. It's interesting that people who experience systemic oppression are often called vulnerable. Yes, more vulnerable because, for example, maybe they can be beaten up by police even to death in a routine traffic stop, or assaulted by an abusive partner or spouse, or have a life expectancy in the zip code they live in that's a decade or two less than the life expectancy in the neighboring zip code because of systemic oppression. I have a picture of a person in my mind, when I think about it, who developed a streak of steel in the face of oppression. Solomon Northrop, whose true story is the basis of the movie and the book 12 Years a Slave. So Northrop was a free black New Yorker who was kidnapped in 1841 and sold into slavery. One day he's free, the next day he's in transit to an auction of enslaved people in New Orleans. As his years of bondage stretch on in the movie and in the story and in his life, you can see this amazingly strong streak of steel develop. You can see him encapsulate himself in steel. This had to happen in order for him to survive. He pays a price for this when he finally is able to escape, but that steel is a big reason he could survive such a horrible ordeal. So in recent years, we Unitarian Universalists have often lifted up the need to flex our vulnerability skill. And it's just good, though, to think, is it always a virtue? Was expressing vulnerability going to be a virtue for Solomon Northrop? Is being vulnerable an absolute good? I can think of a couple other circumstances in which expressing vulnerability is not necessarily a good thing. The first is when we're expressing vulnerability and it's motivated by a desire to manipulate others. Let's say, and this is a purely hypothetical example, that I majorly screw up at home. And it's good to admit the exact nature of my screw up to the other human beings I cohabitate with, to admit my wrongdoing. And as I do, and I show my vulnerability, that's good, unless maybe consciously or unconsciously, I'm doing it in the hope that it might preempt their anger. Like, look at me. I'm just being so vulnerable for you. Don't be mean to me, okay? A little tad of manipulation. Another circumstance is when we express our vulnerability, but it's actually, we're just doing it in a way that makes everything about ourselves, that could even be classified as narcissistic. Rather than opening ourselves up and giving space to other people to share their vulnerability, we hog the floor. See how vulnerable I am? I'm sharing this, and let me share this other thing, and this thing, and that thing, and they never get a chance to share back. So there's a need to express our vulnerability skillfully, and I'm using that in the sense the Buddhists use that term skillful. So here are a good couple questions to ask ourselves when we're thinking about being vulnerable. First, is there a power difference between us and the person or people we want to share with? If we're at the bottom of that, this may not be smart. This may be a dangerous thing to do. And what is the motivation I feel for expressing vulnerability? Is it to be manipulative? Is it to have the focus on me, or is there a greater good into it? Is it about a mutual connection? I think mutual connection is so important to this being vulnerable. Outside of relationships that are set up to be a helper and someone who's helped, like a therapist, sometimes a minister, other than that, vulnerability should be in the context of mutuality, where we share back and forth with our lives. I'm thinking about this question of how can we help our children and youth develop skill in this area of being vulnerable? And I'm using our children and youth in the sense of the village raising the children and youth, not just the parents and guardians. Raising children is all about teaching and reinforcing difficult and paradoxical balances with our kids. And expressing vulnerability is no exception. We need to help them be able to do that in safe spaces, but also develop that streak of steel that they're inevitably going to need in life. And we need to help them be able to express openly and honestly when it's safe to do so, but put up walls around them when it's clearly not safe. We need to help them be able to listen to others as well as share. So how might a spiritual community like this one do this work of helping all of us of all ages develop the ability to be skillfully vulnerable? The most important to me is to create safe space for us to do that. Last year, this congregation adopted a relational covenant that was partly about creating safe space here, reinforcing safe space where we can share deeply with each other. And an aside, if you don't remember what that covenant is or didn't see it, it's on our website on the community tab. I encourage you to look at it, and I'm going to speak more about it at a sermon next month. Then we have small group experiences like theme circles, which are so important, partly because they create safe spaces for people in smaller community to be vulnerable, to share their stories, to listen to other stories with compassion and acceptance. If you haven't connected with a small group here, I really encourage you to do so. It's a commitment of time, it's a commitment of energy, but it's such a key to me to unlocking the spiritual power of being part of this congregation. We also need to continue focusing on safe space in our children and youth programming. These are spaces where we can help our kids develop that skill as well as their streaks of steel. So like most spiritual tasks, knowing when to be vulnerable and when to cultivate the internal streak of steel, that's going to take attentiveness. It's going to take a spirit of intentionality to be able to do that. To help us do that, I've slightly tweaked the Serenity Prayer. Here's my prayer. May each of us find the courage to use our streaks of steel when that's what we need, the courage to express all our vulnerability when that's what we need, and the wisdom to know when to do which one. May it be so. Our closing hymn today is number 1007, There is a River Flowing in My Soul. It is in the smaller teal hymnal, wherever you are. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and sing out.
Please join me in the closing words. May peace dwell within our hearts and understanding in our minds. May courage steel our will and love of truth forever guide us.